Okay, come on in and sit down. I'm your professor now, and we're going to talk about why you need to be a curious person. What up, Search fam? Sade here. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new, my name is Sade, and I'm out here curating and co-creating a cool-ass life. And that includes talking about how we're going to be smarter in 2026. Now, whether this is your first time coming across my little corner of the internet, or you keep coming back and you have not subscribed, might I suggest that you join my internet family and be made aware of every time I post, which is usually on the weekend. So hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Now, as I have told you, if you've stuck around at any length to the channel, I'm a college professor, right? I teach African American studies and women and gender studies and African American religion. So I am quite well versed in teaching. So what I wanted to bring you all, because I do talk a lot about books on my channel, is talking more about the technical side of literacy and being curious and being a lifelong learner. Now, as I tell my students who actually take me at the university, raggedy millennial professor, there will be profanity and probably a couple pop culture references. So if that doesn't suit your sensibilities, I totally understand. You don't have to be here. But if it does, have a seat. Here we go. We're going to talk seriously about remaining curious and how I remain curious as a person who is a lifelong learner. So above all else, even with the degrees and the fact that I read a lot, the most important part of that is that I am always curious, right? And I think that curiosity is something that we have to develop in our lives. Like, some of us have a sort of innate curiosity, and some of that gets fostered by the things that we participate in over the course of our lives. Now, I will say, because of that, it might be harder for some to develop curiosity and imagination, but I want to help you out. So if you want to read more books, this is going to be particularly helpful for you, because for me, reading is an active activity, right? It's not a passive activity like watching things or sometimes listening to audiobooks. I make that an active activity as well. But I'm going to give you a few tips that I find keep me engaged in the material that I am taking in. And maybe this will also help you to be a little bit more mindful in how you take in media, right? So this is not necessarily just for reading, but it is applicable to reading, but it's also applicable to how you listen to music, going and looking at art, listening to podcasts or watching things on TV. I think that being a more curious person just really helps you to become smarter and more well-versed, right? But here are some ways that you can sort of channel that in a way that lets you get something back on the time that you're spending, okay? So number one is to always back up, right? Always take a couple of steps back from what you are internalizing. So for me, what that looks like with many of the books that I read, and I've been doing this for a few months now, is intentionally, as I read a section of a book, I stop and I ponder on it, right? I take time to like think about my own thoughts in conversation with what I've just taken in. For example, I was reading Looking for Lorraine by Imani Perry, which is the biography of playwright and novelist, the late Lorraine Hansberry. And so I was reading it, and when I read or listened to, because I was doing the audiobook, about how she was mentored by Langston Hughes, right? And this is something I tell my students all the time, is that you have to look at things in in context, but also within a landscape, that most of the things that we learn about in these sort of like isolated fragments, but that it really takes away from how things are interconnected, right? So I did not know that Lorraine Hansberry was mentored by Langston Hughes, who wrote the poem A Dream Deferred, which is at the beginning of A Raisin in the Sun. This is the poem that inspires part of A Raisin in the Sun that Hansberry was working with. But I'm like, wow. Again, we have to take into account, like, in the context, when Lorraine Hansberry was born, she was born in like the 20s or 30s or something like that, because she died in her late 30s, I think she died in her late 30s. And she was friends with James Baldwin. Like, they were very close friends, as well as Nina Simone. And she was mentored by Langston Hughes. And her parents they owned an apartment building at a time when people were living in kitchenettes and or living in these very small apartments that were like basically chopped up apartments into like smaller apartments. That was indicative of the 20s and the 30s, with the sort of great migration into northern and Midwest industrial cities. This is where many Black people lived. But her parents owned a building and like leased to Black people at a time when it was really hard for Black people to get housing in everywhere, but in northern cities, because of how redlining worked and how segregation worked. Go with me. So in reading that in Hansberry, like, I had to take a couple of steps back and be like, dang, how does Hansberry become developed? And sort of this is what the biography gets at, how she developed in her culture, her socio-historical moment. But also things that like blow my mind is that her closeness and proximity to people like Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, and as well as people like Langston Hughes, who's also close to Du Bois because of the Harlem Renaissance. And two, that she was a close friend to people like James Baldwin and Nina Simone, who Baldwin in particular, we talk about Black expatriation and Baldwin's back and forth between, New York, the United States, and France and other parts of the world. And so like I'm learning these things, and it's also jogging my memories. So I have to stop and be like, oh, even taking 5 minutes to just like let a thought attempt to complete itself goes a long way in keeping you curious, because now I'm starting to bring together bits of information that were already in my head. And like now I might want to go down a bit more of a rabbit hole with it, which is my next tip, which is to follow an impulse to discover, right? And so literally using the same example, I could go down the hole of like, who was impacted by Langston Hughes and what did they produce, right? And what does that say to the conversation that's being had in the 30s and 40s and into the 50s, right? With the Harlem Renaissance and the Chicago Renaissance, what does it mean for these Black creators to be in conversation with one another? Because again, when we learn about the things, we mostly learn about them in these isolated instances, which one of my also favorite examples to use with my students is that when we talk about the Harlem Renaissance and we talk about these writers and creators and artists, they were in community with one another, right? So people like Zora Neale Hurston and Wallace Thurman and Bruce Nugent and Arna Bontemps and Langston Hughes, they knew one another. Matter of fact, Wallace Thurman, Bruce Nugent, and Langston Hughes, they was roommates. And Zora Neale Hurston was always over their house. But because of the sort of new Black man movement that is sort of proffered by people like Alain Locke and W.E.B. Du Bois about like, respectable Black people and how we express Black history and Black culture to the wider society, you have people like Zorna Hurston and Langston Hughes who are homies getting into beef because they have differing opinions on what it means to record and create Black things that tend to Black culture. And so, then the girls start fighting. They start talking about each other and they write it. And it's hysterical, right? So I think it's important to follow an impulse to discover. So if something that you are taking in makes you go, huh, and I just ask a random question, give yourself time to actually go down a rabbit hole and get an answer to that question. I think frequently we sort of zip past our sort of musings and wanderings and don't actually be like, well, let me look into this a bit. So you could do it real quickly, set yourself a timer for 5-10 minutes, and then go down a rabbit hole and see what you find, right? Because that it makes you that much more well versed and that much more able to understand the thing that you are consuming. So it's not just consumption, it's engagement. This is what we are really trying to get at, is not just being consumers of things and of media and of materials, but engagers with these things, right? Because the more we engage with media and with the things around us, the more we want to, right? The more well versed, the more grounded in the world we become by being an active participant in, the world around us as well as in culture. So, again, to go with this, my next tip is to keep track of your thoughts and discoveries, right? You need to record everything. And so, whether that is you have a, tiny notebook, even maybe one even smaller than this, that you use to hold your thoughts. Like if you go down a rabbit hole, you take your notes and be like, what did I learn from this? What is this making me think? Right? Just asking yourself a few questions, or if there's something brings up an outstanding question, write that question down. Even if you don't have time to get to it today, you wrote it down and you kept a record of it. But it also helps you keep a record of where you are at a given point in time. So you can write it down. You can keep it in the notes app on your phone. You can do voiced notes to yourself. And I do voice notes as a part of my Substack, where if you join my Substack, you get these short, podcast episodes of me musing on what I read. And as much as I'm sharing it online, really it's for me. It allows me, again, space in multiple capacities to record my thoughts, right? So I do it via the voice notes as well as through, writing it out as a journal entry to myself, whether it's handwritten or I dump my brain on my computer and just type for 15 minutes. But it's important to keep track of your discoveries as well as your thoughts on these things, because you actually find out so many things when you're able to keep a track of even where your own thinking was, right? Next is that you want to, at minimum, if you don't know where to get started with sort of reflecting on things that you are consuming, I would say ask yourself two questions, and they are very simple questions, but they are what we call higher order thinking questions. They really make you stop and have to come up with more than a few word answer. Like you actually have to work through a thought, and that is how and why. How does this thing function? How do I see this working? Right? And why? Why do I care about this? Might be the first question. What about this is interesting to me? Right? And so by asking yourselves, even starting with those 2 or 3 questions, you allow yourself the space to dig into your own motivations. It really does help you to get to know yourself a lot better, like the things you're actually interested in, why you might be interested in a thing, but also how certain items connect together, even for your own way of being. Next, you need time to daydream, right? I know we get told that daydreaming is a bad thing, just like people spacing out and things like that. But I mean, also as someone who has a spicy mind, I find being able to daydream is active for me, because again, when I'm not trying to wrangle my brain into doing and processing in a particular way. And it was scary for me to get started, just like giving myself 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and just letting my brain do what it wants to do, right? Go in a direction and not just follow it. But what I have found that it has allowed me being able to daydream again puts me more in tune with myself, my own impulses, my own desires, my own questions, but also it allows me to come up with other things that I find interesting that like I didn't think about or I was sparked by something else, but to just see where my brain organically desires to be and giving it time to do that. And that's kind of play, right? You need downtime for your brain to just exist without things constantly being put into it, but see what your brain is actually trying to put out, which is what daydreaming is for me. And like, again, you don't have to do this for an hour, 2 hours, or anything like that. You literally could set a timer and do it for 5 to 10 minutes and just let yourself be at ease and see what your brain does. And maybe even after that, again, in remaining curious, document it, right? So if you like sit for 5 minutes and you're like, oh, this thing keeps looping for me, write it down. You may come back to it, you may not. But the fact that you have a record of it means that it's out in the world and it makes a little bit more space. At least that's me. Finally, I would say that you need to be active, right? I think an active body helps the mind to be more active as well. So for me, what that looks like, I like to get my workouts in because that is my space to do my audiobooks, but also especially when it came to doing my walks, being outside, which there are a number of reasons why going outside and walking for 20 minutes and just letting your mind wander is really good for your health. But that's another video for another person that ain't me, but just trust me on this one. So when I take my walks, you know, however long, at minimum 20 minutes, but sometimes I go for an hour, hour and a half, depends. But in doing so, I, one, use part of that time to get through my audiobooks, especially my more mentally strenuous ones, because then I'm only focusing on listening and letting my brain wander. But then after a while, I will turn that off or I will start my walk in complete silence and just let my brain go where it wants to go while my feet are moving. And it's been really good for sort of my mental health and my ability to sort of be grounded and prepared for the day. So I will say that being active helps your brain to remain curious because you are potentially allowing it space, especially if you couple it with things like letting your brain wander or listening to an audiobook instead of like music or something like that. You know, those sorts of things. I think these are just a few small things that you can do that will make a large difference in the long run, right? That if you do this 30 days, because it takes at least 21 to develop a habit. So if you do it for 30 days and just record what you're thinking, what rabbit holes you're going down, and taking in material with a little bit more intentionality to engage with it, just see where you come out at the end of the day. And come back and let me know. Because like I tell my students all the time, y'all might think I'm just talking outside of my neck, and I might be. But who knows? If you try it and it works, and you find yourself becoming that much more smart, right? Then you're up. But if not, you're no worse off than you were. So as always, friends, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell a friend about the channel. I'll see you in the next one.